Thanks for clicking on the video. This is the intro to the complete Silk tutorial series, which I'm starting now. I will go over all the tools a few at a time. It'll be a lot of work, so I want to start by showing a fairly advanced result that you can get if you put up with the system. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. There's a Patreon link for the project in the description. I want to give a shout out to Lee Talon for being the first Patreon supporter to make a donation. Don't hesitate to take the free Patreon membership though. I have to be honest, Silk is not easy to use. It's very difficult. The only reason to use it at all is because everything else fails. If you already know all the standard CAD surfacing tools, you will know that what I'm showing on the screen right now is not easy to do in any system. Specifically, what I'm showing here is a complex curve section that starts completely flat and blends very smoothly into 3D curves that are all different to each other. And then all those curves, there are six around the bottom, reduces to just a four-sided surface at the top where this piece here, and this piece here merge into a single surface. I was able to obtain a valid offset of the outer surface that I designed, and I was able to join all the pieces on the bottom, and I had to use a couple of FreeCAD tools to finish a few tricky pieces, like there's a little surface right here. This little surface here was done outside of Silk from the surface workbench, and it all works well together, and you can see that the final solid that I produce is a valid solid that you can perform Boolean operations on and use standard CAD tools after you're done with the Silk workbench. The model we're looking at is a rework of a user model that was submitted to the forum by SoulWager. Let's take a look. Here's the original model. And you can see here, that it uses a large number of surfaces as the basis for blending. Now, the surfaces I was showing later work a little bit differently because I ended up using different curves than he did. But what's special about what SoulWager did is that he's using much more surfaces and making much more ambitious models than any other user has done before. Now, here's an example of the previous model he did. You can see that it uses a lot of surfaces to get the job done. There are other users and people on YouTube that show their results on YouTube that have made very nice models. So Raphael 3D here shows a very nice model that was then cut and colored outside of Silk, but he made the main body with it. And there's also this YouTuber I found today, which makes a really good model with a really good structure. But just like the toothbrush here, there's a small number of base surfaces that are blended and then mirrored and arrayed. So the organization challenge is not as big. Whereas if you look at SoulWager's model and the way I redid it, there are a lot of surfaces, a lot of things to deal with. And so it challenges me to explain in this series of tutorials how to use the tools in the correct order and how to organize the result so that you can navigate it and modify it in an effective manner. Now, one thing I do is I make extensive use of copy-paste to reuse a lot of things. So for example, there's a standard sketch node. I copy-paste that all the time. There's also a full curve that's been split into 3 pieces. And I have a version that's made with a 3-line sketch, and I have a version that's made with 2 node sketches. And so you can copy-paste that all over, and that actually does a lot of the work to do the initial setup. So when you look in here and you look at these sketches here and you look at the curves, but not only that, you look at the sketches, the curves, but also all the points on them that you need to cut up the curves, and the resulting pieces were all made by copy pasting. Now, when you copy paste them, they're all in separate folders, and you do have to organize them in order to produce these views that allow you to find things. But it's a gradual thing. You start by making the utilities and you organize them. Then you prepare an entire section like this one, and you organize it. And then when you make your model, you can just grab the folders and reorganize them in a progressive manner. So it's a lot to do, but if you don't do it yourself, you basically have no chance of finding the things it is you need to work on. And in terms of the work, let me give you an idea of what's involved. Let's start towards the end. Once we have the basic surfaces and we've blended them, we can join them for the outer skin. Then we take that outer skin and we offset it inward to make the inner skin. And we have to do these separately because this surface has holes. There's a hole on the bottom and there's two little holes here. And the reason for that is they're better done by FreeCAD Surface Workbench Fill. Now, FreeCAD Surface Workbench Fill makes a good fill for these surfaces, but it doesn't offset properly. So I offset it before the fill, and then I have to make the fill both inside and outside. And then I have to create the portion to join the bottom separately. When I've done that, now I have all the surfaces right here. I can join it all into a solid, and this is a good solid that I can do CAD on. If we go back towards the beginning, in terms of what it takes to create the basic surfaces and the blended surfaces, you see that you will need to somehow create and manage all these sketches. Now, there's a lot of copy pasting involved, but you need to know where they are and what they do if you have any hope of actually producing good curves, which will make good surfaces. So once you have all of those, it's automatically created all of these polygons, all the curves, all the cutting points, and all the split curves from the copy pasting. But now you have to do another manual phase, which is creating the grids, creating the surfaces from the grids, using the surfaces and the curve segments to chop up the surface and blend it. And what the blending does is across each edge, we're going to cut back. See, here we cut back. And then we produce a blend along the edge. And where the surfaces meet at a corner, we're going to blend in between the edges, and that's what these blue surfaces are. If you look at all of this is fairly consistent in the workflow, but it leaves a hole in the middle. And this hole is a little bit more complicated because we need to go back to the original curve, split it again to create these three surfaces. And it gets very involved here in terms of how to chop up this top surface and these surfaces in order to blend them together. Because what it produces is very different from what we saw earlier. Now it turns around, it rolls around the corner here and here, and there's many more small pieces to keep track of in order to produce the result. And here we see it again. The curves, the main surfaces, and the blend. And remember, the blend has these little holes that we're going to fill with the surface workbench later. So it's a lot of work, and it's very tricky to organize everything to get to this point. And now we've created the topology. But the reality is when you get to here, your curves were probably not quite right in order to produce the final good surfaces. So now you have to go back and really spend some time adjusting all the sketches that we had here in order to produce something you actually like. So you need to know what things are and what things do to produce a good surface. And once you've produced a good surface, a very important step is to check that it offsets correctly. Because if you get if the surfaces fold over when you at this step, then you're not going to produce a good solid at the end. You'll get all the way to the end, but then when you try to use it, it won't work. So you need to get to here. You need to get to this point where you have the topology to make the curves good. Then you need to check that they offset correctly. And then finally you get your surfaces. So the workflow of a very simple node sketch that we can copy paste. Let's see, let's go right here. We're going to hide this. We're going to hide everything in here. If you go back to the beginning, we start by a simple sketch that we can copy paste. Then we get a split curve that we can copy paste. And here, it makes sense to keep everything in the same folder because we're going to copy paste it together. But once we've copy pasted it, it will make sense to take all the sketches and put them in their own folder. Take all of these objects and put them in their own folder. And we'll be doing that a few times along the way. And it's about the same amount of work each time. Once, if you remember, we have this area here. When we're doing the main workflow of the surfaces that kind of all work the same way, the nice thing is there's not a lot of stuff that's on top of each other. So it's pretty easy to create these view sets where you can see all the objects that are in a folder and have a quick way to find them and to see how they're behaving while you're editing the sketches. But when you get up here, we're working the same curve over and over. So we're splitting this curve, but this curve was already split. We need to have a separate folder for that so that we can turn it on and off easily and find the things we need without seeing them on top of each other. And there's a couple layers to this right here. So it's going to take a good amount of work. But along the way, we'll learn a lot of cool things and we'll be able to do simpler models. For example, we could do something like this, which is fairly tricky, but very simple because we work directly from a normal CAD object. We only have to create this one surface and mirror it twice, and we get what appears to be a very complex model in the end. But if you know how to use the tools, it's not that hard to do. But you have to do it in order. And so that's what we're going to get into next.